All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Central Florida's Public Policy Forum. I'm Steve Mort, the host of WUCF's Newsnight program, which airs on WUCF on Friday nights at 8:30. And today we're diving into a conversation about birthright citizenship in the United States. And our journey with citizenship isn't new, of course. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. It was a pivotal moment in our nation's history, a direct response to the injustices of slavery, explicitly ensuring that all persons born in the United States, regardless of race, would be full citizens. It overturned the Dred Scott decision and promised path to full belonging for those who had been systematically denied their fundamental rights. Today, we find ourselves at another crucial juncture: birthright citizenship, the principle that anyone born on U.S. soil automatically becomes a citizen, is facing unprecedented scrutiny. Some policymakers argue that the current interpretation creates challenges we didn't anticipate in 1868. The rise of international migration, concerns about so-called birth tourism, and debates about border security have brought this long-standing policy into sharp focus. Current policy discussions center on several key concerns: the economic impact of automatic citizenship, potential strain on public services, questions of national security, of course, and border integrity, which are much in the news at the moment, and the changing global landscape of migration and citizenship. But this isn't just about numbers or policies. It's about people as well. It's about what it means to be part of this complex, diverse nation that we call home. Birthright citizenship isn't just a legal technicality. It's a profound statement about who we are as a community, a state, and a nation. It represents our ongoing dialogue about belonging, opportunity, and what it truly means to be an American. Well, over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll hear from experts who bring different perspectives, research, and lived experiences to this critical discussion. Our goal is simple: to create a space for thoughtful, respectful dialogue about a policy that impacts millions of lives. And I want to remind everyone that our forum's strength lies in our ability to listen, really listen to perspectives that might challenge our own assumptions. So we're here to learn and not divide. And with that, I'll bring in the panel now, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves for our audience online. And first of all, if I can start with you, Patricia.
Okay, so my name is Patricia Dollahan. I'm an attorney with the Office of Student Legal Services, and we offer free legal services to UCF students who pay the activity and service fee. I am not an expert in constitutional law or in immigration law. Mostly what we do is housing. About 40% of what we do is students that have housing issues, traffic cases, some criminal cases like misdemeanors up to felonies of third degree, and then some consumer cases and contested divorces, etc. So we offer a broad range of services. And I'm here in my personal capacity, not speaking for the university, but just on the research that I did, and just hope will be helpful. Thank you.
Ms. Denise Hernandez-Gruber. I'm an immigration attorney here in Orlando, Florida. I have my own practice for over 25 years where I solely practice immigration law. I am an alumni of UCF, so I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
I apologize for getting your name wrong. Let's start then with the original intent of the 14th Amendment. As I sort of outlined there, some critics argue that the original intent of that amendment didn't foresee kind of the contemporary issues surrounding birthright citizenship. And I'm wondering, and I'll start with you, Denise, how those in the sort of the immigration field are kind of interpreting, are looking at this issue. And I wonder, sort of legal scholars and historians, interpret the framers' context here. Do current interpretations of that amendment, do you think, align with or challenge what the original intent of that amendment was?
Well, currently the legal standard has been in line with what was instated by the framers. The framers of the 14th Amendment, particularly Senators Jacob Howard and Liam Turnbull, were explicit in their intentions when they were drafting this provision. And they really try to bring the principle of birthright citizenship, which would ensure that everybody born in the US, except for certain exceptions where we have diplomats, foreign nationals like of enemy forces, stuff like those individuals are exempt from the clause. But otherwise, they would automatically be a citizen of the United States. And this was really in order to prevent and find a way to deal with discrimination and allow for certain rights for these individuals. It has been challenged and it has been upheld since the primary case is Wong Kim Ark. Since that case with the US Supreme Court, this principle has been upheld and continues to be upheld.
And the Supreme Court generally has held that to be the case.
That is correct.
Yeah. Recently, and I guess this is the kind of the nub of the issue, the president issued an executive action which seeks to limit birthright citizenship. He argues that children born to non-citizens or undocumented immigrants should not automatically be granted citizenship. I guess the White House says the 14th Amendment has never really been interpreted to extend citizenship universally to everyone born in the United States, saying, I guess, it excludes persons. Also, saying that clause, I guess, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, hasn't really been adjudicated as such. I guess this is a question of whether children born to undocumented or those on temporary visas are not subject to the jurisdiction of the US, or whether that just applies to diplomats, as you say. I mean, what do you think and I'll come to you in a moment, Patricia. I mean, Denise, what do you, as an immigration attorney, do you see a compelling argument there for modifying or eliminating that birthright citizenship based on that argument?
I think it's not as simple as it has been led to be. I think if there is, you will be changing the whole entire thinking. Right now, the United States, and it is called Jus Solis, is the policy that we have used, which is born in the United States, is born in a country where you receive your citizenship. So changing the jurisdiction, we would end up having to change the entire thinking process, as well as an entire constitution for that.
Yeah.
So I do think, of course, there's always we should always be open to discussing and growing as a country, as a society, as human beings in general. But I think we need to also think about changing this, how it affects people themselves.
Yeah. I mean, to note, I'm a US citizen. I came through the naturalization process, which is another way that you can achieve citizenship in this country. I'm wondering what you think, Patricia. I mean, you probably deal with a lot of people who are not citizens of the United States. That obviously UCF is a very large and diverse school. There are people from all kinds of backgrounds, and immigration statuses.
I mean, this seems to me like a constitutional issue.
Yeah.
Above all, even above immigration. So basically, the Constitution says all persons. So it's very broad. I mean, they could have made it more restrictive. They could have said people who are descendants of Africans who came to this country as enslaved people are granted these rights. Now, the drafters chose to say all people. So all people is very broad, it includes more than just African Americans who were brought here against their will. And I guess the case that Denise mentioned involved a Chinese citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was born in the United States, so therefore he was considered Chinese citizen, but he'd frequently go back to mainland China. And then once he came back, one of his temporary trips, he was excluded from coming in because they were claiming he was not a citizen, because Chinese people could not be citizens under the Chinese Exclusionary Act. So they say, you're not a citizen because you're Chinese, your parents are Chinese. And he challenged that, saying, I was born in the United States, therefore I am an American citizen. And the Supreme Court, that was about 30 years after the amendment was passed, agreed with him that yes, you're born in the United States, you are an American citizen. And then the only exceptions were like if you were a diplomat, because then you have diplomatic immunity. You cannot be charged in this country. They can expel you, but they cannot bring you to jail, most
You could
likely.
rack up parking tickets in New York City
So
without penalty.
they're not under the
Yeah,
jurisdiction of the
yeah.
United States. And the other examples, like if you have a child born in a naval ship,
Yeah.
and it's a war, and that child doesn't gain American citizenship. So it was interpreted very broadly to basically include everyone. The other thing is like, how does the justices interpret the Constitution? So you can either be I think or originalists, where you basically look at what the words say and what was meant back then. Or the other school of thought that's less popular now is that you have a living constitution, that it evolves with as norms evolved. So I was looking at some quotes from the Supreme Court justices, which I thought it was interesting. So basically it is originalist versus a living constitution. So Supreme Court Justice Anthony Scalia said, the Constitution is dead, said Scalia, dead, dead, dead. Its meaning is immutable. It means what it says. Then on describing originalism, he says, the Constitution I interpret and apply today is not living but dead, or as I prefer to call it, enduring. It means today not what current society, much less the court, thinks it ought to mean, but what it meant when it was adopted. So that's the school of thought that, in favor of originalism. Also, Neil Gorsuch said, I interpret the Constitution as a law, that I interpret its text as a text, and I understand it to have the meaning that it had at the time people ratified it. So that meaning doesn't change over time. It's not up to me to update or infuse my own policy views into it. So, and that's what originalism is, that you look at what it says and you look what the founders intended. And then I was looking at the rules of interpretation, rules of statutory construction interpretation, which are under the under the United States Supreme Court. Number one, the law should be given its plain meaning wherever possible. Number three, every word within the statute is there for a purpose and should be given its due significance. Every word. So we have in the Constitution, all persons, all must be given its meaning. And finally, all laws are to be interpreted consistent with the legislative intent for which they were originally enacted. So you go back to what was meant when it was enacted. Now, what we think it should mean now, but what it meant back then. There's another school of thought, but that's really not the current school of thought. There's a living constitution. And then, Justice William Brennan, which is now deceased, says, the ultimate question must be, what do the words of the text mean in our time? For the genius of the Constitution rests not in the static meaning it might have had in a world that is dead and gone. So that's the living Constitution, but that's not really what is accepted nowadays. All the most recent Supreme Court justices are originalists. So in that situation, you'd be going at what did it mean back then, not what we want it to mean now.
I mean, I guess, if there's an originalist strand on the current Supreme Court, and I'll throw this one to you, Denise. I mean, can we draw any conclusions as to how justices might view this issue? I've heard various different legal scholars talk about this. Many of them, I will say, believe that the Supreme Court would, if this issue comes before them, reject the idea that, to eliminate birthright citizenship, that they would interpret the 14th Amendment as it's been traditionally interpreted. What would you think you might see, particularly from the conservative justices?
I think if we look at it, the word all is all. And if we're going to look at the Constitution itself and the Supreme Court being originalism, they would look at all and include everybody. That would be my opinion. Yeah. I could be surprised, but
sure. I mean, I guess given that how judges have generally looked at this and how the courts so far have treated this executive order, I wonder whether this might be simply, this executive order might simply be about getting this in front of the Supreme Court eventually. So the anticipation is that the lower courts would strike it down.
I believe so. I would agree with that. I think the current standard is trying to get policies before the Supreme Court
Mhm.
in order to get a clearer definition in one way. But if we go back to this particular amendment, and if the court goes back to the original when it was originally created and the original words that were used by the different senators, they would, in my opinion, still find that all is all. We can't forget too that slavery was not just people of color. It was also people from different countries, and they were being protected by this amendment as well. So I think we tend, when we look back at the history of the amendment, we think, oh, it just applied to slavery, but there were other people as well involved in this.
Yeah. I wanted to look at this actually as well. I mean, we look at how things are in the United States, but the issue of birthright citizenship is something which countries around the world grapple with, right? And I'm kind of wondering how that US policy of, giving citizenship to people because they were born here compares to other places. I mean, I know there are a lot of countries where it's based on your ancestry, your parents, or, there are lots of other issues at play. I mean, is the US, and I don't know if you guys know, unusual in that way, whether there are any lessons that can be learned from sort of international perspectives on this issue?
Well, I don't know statistically
Yeah.
how many countries use this Joe Solis standard or born in countries citizenship. But I do believe I think we need to look back at what it helps with. When you're given citizenship from birth, you tend to have a tie. You have support to your country because you were born here. You have some form of connection per se. So in my opinion, you're more willing to be engaged in what the country needs. Be it serve in the military, be it in school and be a professor and help educate it or help your communities. Those are what the benefits I see, or some of the benefits I see of being born, receiving your citizenship at birth. We look at different countries, and sure, there is some benefits as well as if I receive it from my grandmother. I know Italy is that way. It's through hereditary. I always get tongue-tied with that word. But you do have your family ties. So then you have an affinity for Italy per se. So you would want to support and do what you can for your family ties.
Yeah. I mean, it's worth noting, of course, that even if you're born overseas to an American citizen parent, then you are also an American citizen. You don't have to be born on US soil to become one, right?
Correct. You would have to go to the embassy and file what is called a birth abroad from a citizen, and then go through that immigration process.
Well, let's talk about the American identity part of this. I mean, when we talk about birthright citizenship, we're also talking, I guess, about what it means to be an American. And I wonder whether the citizenship questions kind of reflect our country's, ongoing conversation about who we are as a nation, having, rapidly evolved, as we've already talked about from the early days of immigration to this sort of highly diverse society that we have today. And would we be reshaping something that's been sort of a core part of our national identity, I guess, if we change what birthright citizenship means? I mean, how important do you think it is, Patricia, to sort of the country and how we see ourselves?
So just to answer like the first question as to what other countries have a similar system.
Yeah.
I would think most of the new countries do, like newer, like within the countries that were like created, established in the past 200, 300 years. So if you're looking at Canada, Mexico, all of Central America, I think Colombia may be the only one that doesn't have birthright citizenship, but all the countries South America do.
It's an interesting point,
The
yeah.
newer countries have this birthright because I think they were attracting immigrants and they wanted them to be incorporated, feel part of society, feel part of their country. So,
That's an interesting point. A lot of the old world doesn't necessarily have that same view
Right.
of citizenship. Yeah.
and then in Europe, they have other, maybe like a combination of both, like some sort of a hybrid. So for example, in France, if you're born there, you're not necessarily a French citizen, but if you continue living there, by the time you're 18, you become a French citizen. In Italy, you can apply for citizenship once you turn 18. So it's not like an all or nothing. It's more like, okay, you're born here, but we want to make sure that you establish roots here and you're connected to the country and all this. And if you are, you can get your citizenship. So it's not an all or nothing. It's kind of a hybrid type of system.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be, I would think it'd be a big change, would be a change from something we have been doing since like 1860 something.
Sure.
1860, yeah,
Yeah.
so yes, it'd be a very, very huge change. Yeah, but I believe that it has to be by constitutional amendment because, the Constitution is the Supreme Court of the land, so you cannot have statutes that contradict that. So I think that if they want to pursue this, it has to be a constitutional amendment. And then, of course, this has to be all vetted out as to what the pros and the cons of doing it, which, of course, none of us are expert as to that, as to what that might imply.
Yeah.
But I think, I would think it has to be a constitutional amendment.
I mean, we are likely to see, however, some legislative efforts. I think Congressman Corey Mills, who represents part of Central Florida, he's introduced some legislation that sort of seeks to address what he describes as loopholes in the current law. But I guess, Denise, there are limits, as Patricia says there, to what Congress can do based on the constraints of the Constitution and how it's been interpreted.
That is correct. And it would have to be by an amendment to the Constitution in order to change that.
It's not easy to do, right?
No, absolutely not.
Constitutional amendments require, what is it, 2/3 of the states and
That is correct.
something like that. Well, I put that question to you about the American identity part of this. And if you change the rules around citizenship to something more akin to what you see in Europe and less akin to what you see in what we call the New World, does that change people's or this country's view of kind of how it sees itself? I often refer to America as being a young country compared to a lot of places, and we're still kind of finding our footing as a nation. Does that change that trajectory, do you think?
I believe it would. I think it would change the landscape. It would shift the demographics and makeups and although some of the different models that other countries have used and do offer some advantages, particularly emphasizing cultural ties because you are living there, and long-term integration, because you would have to be, I know in Argentina, you have to be there 2 years before you can apply for your residency. Okay. And then continue, and you can't leave the country during that period of time for a certain amount of days before you would lose your residency. So there are some advantages to that, but it also would create, it also creates barriers to inclusivity. It also tends to limit what people view as immigrants and what benefits they would receive. The system would also create some kind of barriers to what cultural expectations we would need.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that rule about, having, when you become a resident and then you transition to a citizen, there are similar rules here, right? I think, if you're, and green card holders are in the news a lot these days, but there is a rule about how long you can be out of, off US soil, if you want to apply to become a citizen, right?
That is correct. You cannot, while you're a resident, you cannot be out of the country more than 6 months out of the year. And that is cumulative. So say you leave in January, you come back for a week, it's counted throughout the entire
You have to add
year.
it up.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
it's a pretty strict set of rules. I wonder, when we talk about the politics and public opinion of this, Patricia, immigration is such a big public debate at the moment, and I wonder whether that political discussion and the ideologies that we hear around immigration writ large are kind of, do you think are influencing this debate on birthright citizenship? And I wonder if we've seen, from your point of view, a change in the way public opinion has shifted on this issue over the years. Do you detect a change in that? I mean, it's certainly much more to the forefront of the discussion now. Certainly, people talk about immigration being the most important issue all the time in the polls, right?
Yes, I mean, there was a big part of, oh, I'm sorry, there was a big part of President Trump's
Easy to forget.
platform.
Yeah,
That yes, to do away with kind of an what they saw as an unrestrained immigration. So yes, I think it arose out of that. I believe there's some people may think by denying a birthright citizenship that might discourage people from coming. I'm not sure if there were any studies done on that or not to see if that's a factor or not. But I think there might be a justification for trying to change the 14th Amendment the way we interpret it.
Yeah.
That be disincentive for people to come.
that's an interesting point. I mean, what do you think, Denise? I mean, oftentimes that is one of the reasons it's cited, is that it's one of the draws for immigration, sort of a birth tourism, I guess, is one of the phrases we hear a lot. I mean, do you think that is a draw? Is that a big issue? Do a lot of people do that, do you think?
I don't think so. I think we hear a lot has been brought up in the news about it, but I don't see any statistics as to how many people actually do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think about it, whether or not this issue, it's a fundamental constitutional issue, but is it a part of that, of the general discussion that we're having at the moment about immigration?
Sure, I think it is part of the discussion about it, trying to limit immigration. And so one of the thought processes, if we limit citizenship, people are more willing to cross the borders or overstay their visas and come to the United States.
Yeah. The economic impact of this, do we think, I mean, we often hear that this is sort of a nation of immigrants and that we depend upon immigrants, and a lot of immigrants come here, I guess, with the desire to become citizens. We see a huge number of immigrant students at our public universities, for example, here in Florida. It's a very diverse state. Do you think there are economic consequences to making fundamental changes to the way we view this kind of thing? I'll put that to you, Patricia.
I think that'd be a deeply personal question, depending on the particular facts of the person. So a lot of people, I know about 15-20% of the people we see at Student Legal Service are international students, so a very large percentage. But I think it would be deeply personal. So if somebody's already studying here and they get this great opportunity to get experience and to work here, this probably, if we were to change, it might not affect them that much. But it depends on the totality of the circumstances. If you have somebody from Afghanistan, as a professor, highly qualified, there's no way that he wants to go back. Also, women are being treated in Afghanistan, deprived of education. So in that sense, then this were to change, they maybe make it more likely for the person to choose to go to that country. That makes it easier for their children to be citizens and to get that additional protection. So I think it'll be a deeply personal question. It may be more of a factor for some people who have families versus those who don't. People who may just want to get some experience and go back to their countries. If you have somebody from France, it may not really matter that much if there's no birthright citizenship here. but people from less stable countries that might have more of an impact on, whether they'll come here or to another country who has more favorable laws.
Yeah. What do you hear from your clients, Denise? I mean, is this birthright citizenship issue coming up at all? Are anybody, anyone who might have an immigration issue that they're coming to see you with? Are they concerned about the status of their children, that kind of thing?
Yes, they are. And their concern is mostly, is the government going to take my child away?
Mm.
That is
Whether it's retroactive.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is their big concern, and they rightfully are very fearful about how to handle the situation, because they do want to be in compliance with everything that is asked of them. So,
well, what's your reading of the executive order there? I mean, it's not to apply to people who already have citizenship, right?
correct. It would be after 30 days from the executive order being ratified.
But that hasn't been, that the courts have stayed that?
That is correct. It is currently stayed.
Okay. Well, let's look at the path forward then. If there were to be a change in birthright citizenship, I guess we'll get our crystal balls out and what would the ideal legislative and judicial process look like? I mean, I wonder what steps lawmakers, advocates, legal experts like yourself are going to take to sort of make sure that any changes are done in a kind of thoughtful and equitable way. What do we see happening? And I'll ask you first, Patricia. What do you think might happen if this actually does occur? It would be a pretty significant change, right?
Well, I think that what the administration is trying to do is probably get the case before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court might decide to hear it or not to hear it. And that could be the end of this conversation, right? They could decide not to hear it. They could decide to hear it and say no. The 14th Amendment means what it says. Again, that'll be the end of the conversation. And then the process would be to try to amend the Constitution. So I think anything besides that is speculation.
Yeah, it's an issue that could come to an end very, very quickly, I guess, with a stroke of a pen at the Supreme Court. I mean, what if this does occur, Denise? Does your job change? I mean, is that a significant impact that you're going to see on communities, do you think?
I believe so. I believe it will change because I feel that more people will seek guidance as to how to become or fix their immigration status, for saying a better word, to include their children. Because right now, the immigration law and the immigration petitions and do not include children that were born in the United States. So we would have to go back, change all these applications, change the immigration law to include these now essentially stateless individuals, right?
Yeah.
So
this isn't a birthright citizenship question; it's a naturalization question. But I wonder, since we've seen the sort of the stepped up immigration enforcement, less security, I guess, for people who have residency. Have you seen an increase in interest in people becoming citizens to try to sort of solve their immigration concerns, if you like?
Well, I have seen more people requesting the process, information on the process of becoming a citizen.
Interesting. Okay.
As a resident, you have legal status here in the United States. You are entitled to live, travel, and be as safe as you can. Of course, we all have to follow the rule of law, now though, because of some of the threats of that residency being taken away for offenses, there is a more interest in becoming a citizen for that extra protection.
Interesting. Well, it's a fascinating discussion. Do we have any questions from the audience for our experts here? Anybody? Yeah.
So like I was just wondering about like when you come to the US, like it's super hard to even come to the US, like to get a visa. So for example, I come from Lebanon. I mean, I had to travel all the way back from the Middle East to come here, and I'm sure a lot of people do that. And like to apply to the visa and to get, for example, the tourist visa, you go through a lot. So I feel like the whole process of us being able to come to the US is already hard. So like removing the birthright citizenship from people, I feel like it's probably targeting the people who come to the US illegally, maybe because at the end of the day, like a lot of us who come here undergo a lot of verification and like the application, and I'm sure a lot of people who are already pregnant don't even get the visa. So like I'm wondering like who is this actually targeting?
Yeah. What do you guys think? Patricia, any thoughts on that?
I think it would be a message that immigrants are not welcome. For most, I mean, even if this goes to Supreme Court and they denied it or they don't hear it, I think the message is out there that this is not a welcoming space.
Yeah, Denise, what do you think? I mean, it is,
It's
she's right? It is already quite hard for people to get here. There's a lot of talk about getting in line. That's not really how the immigration system works, right? There isn't a queue that you can get in. It's quite a complicated bureaucratic process.
Correct. It is very complicated, and getting a tourist visa is, it's like getting the golden ticket in one way. And especially in some countries where there are so many people trying to come to the United States and seeking that. And even to become a resident when your family is sponsoring you, there's still a very long process to get in, to have your interview and to pass it and to come into the United States. In my opinion, the executive order is trying to really look at our immigration status, our immigration law, and trying to find a way to reform it.
Yeah.
And this is one of the ways that they're trying to use it. I don't necessarily think it's specific to anybody. I think it's just to the immigration area and stuff.
So it's not to, as our questioner said, to like target any particular group. It's to test the limits of what currently is in place.
That's what I believe.
Yeah. Good question. Any other additional questions before we wrap it up? Looks like we don't. Oh, yes, we do.
Good afternoon. I just want to make sure I understand because I'm not as educated on the topic. As far as the executive order goes, is this for any births that happen after a certain date? So it includes, white Americans, African Americans, and like anyone born here, or is it just for either people that have been naturalized and or immigrants? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Denise. That might be a question.
Well, that's a great question because the executive order says it applies to a child born from a non-immigrant parent, either one or the other. So if one of the parents is not legal, then that's who would it apply to.
But if one person was legal, or if one person was a US citizen, the other person was an undocumented immigrant, that the child of that person born here would still be a US citizen. One of them's got to be an American or a legal
Correct.
resident,
It's
right?
not right.
Okay. Yeah.
It's basically if both parents are here, they are both undocumented or they both here like on temporary status, like a tourist visa or
That's the
student
student
visa.
visa. Right.
or more like a temporary work, sometimes people come here just to work for 3 years or something like that.
H-1B visas, L visas,
So,
visas for
yeah.
work, if you're not in a legal.
Non-immigrant.
Non-immigrant.
So you have,
Visas.
you have the parent who's a permanent resident, what we call the green card. or an American citizen.
Correct.
Yeah. So what? So our student from Lebanon here, if you have a temporary visa, if she were to have a child here with somebody who is also not a permanent resident or citizen, that the idea of this amendment would be that it would not be.
Correct. It would not be a citizen.
Very good to clear that up. Anybody else? Yeah. One more question for you.
My curiosity is, okay, so I'm from the US Virgin Islands. I was born there by parents that were naturalized
Yeah.
eventually at some point, but they were probably residents at the time that I was born. So I don't know if you all have the answer to this, but I'm almost curious to know what would that mean for like US territories like Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands.
That's an interesting one. Yeah. I suspect it's similar to the mainland.
It is. It is I'm from Puerto Rico, so as a US, territory, we are citizens. So, if I birth a child, then she would be a citizen, he or she would be.
So the Virgin Islands, Guam, any of those places,
US
it's
Virgin
exactly the
Islands,
same.
Guam, same thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a fascinating discussion. I appreciate it. Thank you so much to Denise and Patricia on the panel. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your questions from the audience. Appreciate it.
Thank
and look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Thanks.